So, there I am, phone pressed to my ear, literally briefing state prosecutors about government corruption, when some HOA Karen and her teenage son march up my driveway and demand I hand over my Harley keys right now for the good of the community. The smell of motor oil and fresh coffee hung in my garage while morning dew sparkled on $28,000 worth of restored heritage softail. I'm mid-sentence with the state attorney's office, explaining municipal bid rigging, when this kid who's failed his driver's test twice points at my bike and says, "My mum thinks you should let me borrow this for prom." His mother nods like this makes perfect sense. "It's community service, Mr. Washington. Sharing is caring." I'm thinking this has got to be a joke, but then she actually calls 911 on me while I'm talking to prosecutors about corruption. What would you do if some entitled HOA president interrupted your call with law enforcement to steal your motorcycle? Drop a comment with where you're watching from and whether your neighborhood has ever produced this level of crazy. Let me back up and explain how I ended up in this nightmare. My name is Darius Washington, but everyone calls me D-Wash. 22 years in the Army, mostly as a diesel mechanic and logistics coordinator, fixing everything from Bradley fighting vehicles to generators in places where warranty void meant absolutely nothing. After my divorce finalized, I used the settlement and my VA benefits to buy a modest ranch house in Meadowfield Estates. Seemed like a quiet place to rebuild my life and get away from the noise. The Harley, that's my grandfather's bike, Korean War veteran, Bronze Star recipient, died of a stroke 4 years back, left me this 1996 Heritage Softail and about 20 boxes of original parts. Spent every weekend for 4 years bringing her back to life. New paint job in deep metallic blue, rebuilt engine, custom leather seat that fits my hands like a prayer. When I fire her up, that deep rumble of a properly tuned V-twin sounds like freedom itself. Plus, it's one of the few connections I have left to my grandfather's memory. Meadowfield Estates looked perfect on paper. Middle-class subdivision built around an artificial pond, walking trails, speed bumps every 150 yards to keep the kids safe, manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, that peaceful suburban vibe you see in commercials. What they don't advertise is the HOA board members charging $200 monthly to tell you what color you can paint your shutters. Enter Victoria Blackwood, Vicky to her friends, though I suspect that list is shorter than she thinks. Real estate agent, divorced mum, HOA president for 5 straight years, running unopposed because nobody else wanted the headache. Platinum blonde highlights, oversized sunglasses permanently perched on her head, drives a white Mercedes GLE with Realtor One vanity plates. She's got that passive-aggressive communication style perfected. Every email sounds helpful while somehow making you feel like garbage. Victoria believes rules apply differently to quality residents. Her words, not mine. She controls the architectural review committee with an iron fist and maintains a suspiciously cozy relationship with Dale Morrison, our local code enforcement officer. More on him later. My first taste of Victoria's justice came 2 weeks after moving in. Certified letter claiming my motorcycle violated commercial vehicle restrictions under bylaw 8.2c. Apparently my Harley was somehow equivalent to running a business out of my garage. This while my neighbor's landscaping truck sat in his driveway 24/7, and the contractor across the street parked his trailer loaded with equipment right on the street. Oh, and Victoria's Mercedes covered in magnetic real estate signs every weekend. But here's where it got interesting. When I went to the first HOA meeting to address this, Victoria's tone shifted the moment she saw me in person. See, my name on the property records didn't immediately broadcast my race, and I could tell she'd made certain assumptions about who D. Washington might be. The subtle change in her demeanor was unmistakable. That stiffening of posture, the slightly louder voice, the way she suddenly started emphasizing property values and neighborhood standards. I sent a polite email with photographic evidence of actual commercial vehicles requesting equal enforcement. You know what happened next? Emergency board meeting, second violation notice, $200 fine. The diesel fumes from my neighbor's work truck were thick in the air while I photographed his non-commercial Ford F-450 with Martinez landscaping painted on both sides. The irony was almost funny, almost. Then there's Cameron, Victoria's 17-year-old son and the future of America. Apparently this kid failed his driver's test twice, crashed his mom's car into a fire hydrant, and put his dad's pickup through a neighbor's fence. But somehow he's convinced he's ready for a motorcycle. Cameron's been fixated on my Harley since day one, making comments about how some people don't deserve nice things, and how his mum was right about certain types moving into quality neighborhoods. First time he approached me directly, I was washing the bike in my driveway. Kid strolls over, hands in his pockets, and suggests I should let him borrow it for prom night. When I politely explained insurance liability and offered to show him the engineering instead, he got that look kids get when the world doesn't revolve around them, skulked away, muttering about how his mum was right about your people and problem neighbors who don't know their place. That conversation happened on a Saturday. By Tuesday, I had 6 separate violation notices in my mailbox. The pattern was becoming clear, but I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole actually went, or that my phone calls with the state attorney's office were about to become very, very relevant to my own situation. 2 weeks after that first violation notice, Victoria launched what I can only describe as a selective enforcement campaign that would make a Jim Crow bureaucrat proud. She mobilized her network of concerned neighbors, and by concerned, I mean bored housewives with nothing better to do than document my every move. Suddenly I was receiving violation notices faster than junk mail. Grass allegedly 1 4-inch too long, despite measuring exactly 2 3/4 inches, well within the 3-inch limit. Garbage cans visible from the street for 4 hours after pickup, even though collection doesn't happen until noon, and everyone else's cans sit out until evening. Excessive outdoor maintenance sounds for changing my motorcycle's oil on a Saturday afternoon. Each violation came with a $200 fine and enough legal jargon to choke a paralegal. My mailbox started looking like a crime scene stuffed with certified letters, while my neighbor's identical violations went completely unnoticed. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust from Martinez's landscaping truck mixed with the sweet scent of Mrs. Patterson's overgrown honeysuckle as I photographed the hypocrisy. Her grass was actually taller than mine, and the guy 2 doors down had been pressure washing his driveway every weekend for a month. But the racial undertones became impossible to ignore when Victoria started her whisper campaign. Suddenly neighbors were asking each other about safety concerns and whether having that type of person in the neighborhood might affect property values. The coded language was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who'd grown up black in America. That's when I met Sophia Rodriguez, my next-door neighbor and the first person to show me I wasn't going crazy. Sophia's a single mom, works nights as a nurse, raising twin 8-year-olds who somehow managed to be angels compared to Cameron Blackwood. She knocked on my door one evening after I jump-started her car during that ice storm in February. "I've been watching what Victoria's doing to you," she said, handing me a homemade empanada that smelled like heaven. It's the same pattern she used on the Hendersons before they moved, and the Washingtons, and that elderly black couple who used to live where the Kramers are now. Sophia had noticed something I'd missed. Victoria's selective blindness wasn't just about HOA rules. It was about who she thought belonged in her neighborhood. Sophia showed me the pattern. Every black family that had moved to Meadowfield Estates in the past 3 years had faced similar harassment campaigns. Every single one had eventually sold and moved away. The Hispanic families got lighter treatment, but still enough pressure to keep them quiet. The white families, 0 violations, 0 fines, 0 consequences. I decided to fight back with documentation, started spending my evenings researching public HOA meeting minutes, financial records, architectural review decisions. The clicking of my keyboard became a nightly soundtrack, accompanied by the gentle bubbling of my coffee percolator working overtime. Back in the Army, we had a saying, proper preparation prevents poor performance. Time to put that wisdom to work. What I found made my blood boil. Pattern after pattern of Victoria, approving her friends' requests, while denying identical proposals from everyone else. But more disturbing was the racial pattern hidden in the data. Swimming pool permits approved instantly for white board members, delayed 8 months for minority homeowners. Fence modifications. Victoria's poker buddies got rubber stamps, while black and Hispanic families got rejected for aesthetic concerns. During my research, I remembered something from my deployment days. A JAG officer once told us that targeting someone based on race or military service could violate federal discrimination laws. I contacted Maya Chen, a civil rights attorney who specialized in housing discrimination cases. Turns out my Army buddy was right. The systematic harassment of a minority veteran can trigger both Fair Housing Act and Civil Rights Act investigations, and those carry serious federal penalties. But here's where things got really interesting. While cross-referencing recent home sales with HOA violation records, I discovered something that made my mechanic's brain start connecting dots. 5 properties had sold through Victoria's real estate agency in the past 2 years. All 5 sellers were minorities. All 5 had received sudden floods of HOA violations just months before listing. All 5 sold below market value for quick sales. All 5 transactions generated healthy commissions for Victoria's agency. It was like diagnosing a bad transmission. Once you spot the pattern, the whole system's corruption becomes obvious. This wasn't random HOA politics. This was a deliberate racial and economic manipulation scheme designed to maintain neighborhood character while generating real estate profits. Meanwhile, Cameron escalated his motorcycle obsession. This time he approached me with 4 friends in tow, clearly trying to use peer pressure, claimed other cool neighbors let kids borrow their vehicles all the time. When I explained insurance laws and liability issues again, he threw a full teenage tantrum right there in my driveway. "You're hoarding something that should benefit the whole community," he shouted loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "My mom says people like you are what's wrong with America, coming into good neighborhoods and thinking you own the place." My hands tightened around the wrench I was holding, grease from the bike's chain making my grip slippery. The kid was parroting his mother's rhetoric word for word, and I realized this harassment wasn't random teenage entitlement. It was coordinated strategy with a very specific racial component. As Cameron stormed off with his little posse, I made a decision. Time to stop playing defense and start gathering evidence. Real evidence. The kind that holds up in court and ruins corrupt officials' careers. Because if there's one thing 22 years in the army taught me, it's that bullies only understand one language: overwhelming force applied at exactly the right moment. 3 days after Cameron's public tantrum, things escalated to a whole new level of corrupt. I'm in my garage changing the oil on my truck when this guy pulls up in a city vehicle. Dale Morrison, our local code enforcement officer, clipboard in hand, cheap cologne thick enough to cut with a knife, acting like he owns the place. "Got an anonymous complaint about a home-based business," he announces, not bothering with pleasantries. "Need to inspect your property for violations." Anonymous complaint, my ass. The timing was about as subtle as a brick through a window. Morrison starts poking around my garage like he's hunting for buried treasure, looking for any technical violation he can write up. The smell of motor oil mixed with his bargain basement aftershave created this nauseating cocktail that made me want to open every door and window. Here's where my research habit paid off. The night before, I'd been digging through public marriage records. Don't ask me why, just following instincts, and discovered Dale Morrison's daughter married Victoria's brother back in 2019. Small world, right? So much for impartial code enforcement. But Morrison's approach had an edge that went beyond family connections. The way he poked through my tools, the comments about keeping things clean in good neighborhoods, the suggestion that maybe I should consider a more suitable area for my activities. The racial coding was subtle but unmistakable. Morrison finally settles on oil stains in my driveway. "Environmental hazard," he declares with the authority of someone who probably couldn't change his own oil. "Contaminating groundwater, violating Municipal Code 16.8D. I wanted to laugh. These were the same oil stains every mechanic in America has dealt with since Henry Ford started mass-producing cars. But I bit my tongue and documented everything. Back in Iraq, we learned that corrupt officials always overplay their hand. Eventually, you just had to be patient enough to catch them. Meanwhile, I kept digging deeper into the neighborhood's recent history. Sophia introduced me to Eleanor Walsh, Dot to her friends, a retired civil rights paralegal who'd moved to Meadowfield 4 years ago. Sharp as a tack at 69, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, Dot had been quietly watching Victoria's operation with professional interest. 25 years working civil rights cases, she told me over coffee in her kitchen, surrounded by legal books and file folders. "I recognize a pattern when I see one. Your Karen isn't just power-hungry, she's running a profitable discrimination scam." Dot walked me through the mechanics of HOA liens, something I'd never thought about before. Turns out unpaid HOA fines become liens against your property just like unpaid taxes. And just like tax liens, they can force foreclosure proceedings if they accumulate enough. The beauty of it from a scammer's perspective is that most homeowners don't realize how serious those little violation notices can become until it's too late. We spent the afternoon cross-referencing property records with HOA financial statements, and demographic data. The pattern was crystal clear. Targeted harassment of minority residents created unpaid fines. Unpaid fines became liens. Liens forced distressed sales. Distressed sales maintained neighborhood demographics while generating real estate commissions. Victoria had turned her HOA presidency into a property flipping machine with a very specific racial agenda. But here's the mini twist that changed everything. Dot discovered that Victoria's real estate company had been purchasing HOA liens from the association at 60 cents on the dollar, then using those same liens to force foreclosures on minority homeowners specifically. She was literally buying the ammunition to destroy her neighbors' lives, then profiting when they lost their homes. 7 properties in 3 years, Dot said, sliding a manila folder across her kitchen table. All minority families, all following the identical pattern, all sold through her agency after foreclosure. The mechanical precision of it reminded me of diagnosing engine problems. Once you understand the system, the failure points become obvious. Victoria had weaponized bureaucracy and racial bias simultaneously. That evening, I'm installing a security camera system in my garage, Amazon's finest motion-activated surveillance equipment, when I hear someone fumbling around outside, 1:30 a.m., and there's Cameron Blackwood trying to start my Harley with what looked like a wire coat hanger and a YouTube tutorial on his phone. The kid had actually knocked the bike over, trying to figure out how to bypass the ignition. The sound of my Heritage Softails kickstand scraping against concrete was like nails on a chalkboard. This machine was my grandfather's legacy, and watching some spoiled teenager treat it like a toy made my blood boil. I found him still struggling with the unfamiliar weight when my motion lights kicked on. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Cameron stammered something about protecting the bike from potential thieves, like he was doing me a favor by breaking into my garage at 1:30 a.m. But then his panic shifted to something uglier. "This is our neighborhood," he said, his voice cracking between teenage squeaks and false bravado. "People like you need to learn respect. My mum's going to make sure you don't belong here." The damage wasn't catastrophic. Some scratches on the original paint, maybe $500 in cosmetic repairs, but the violation felt personal, and the racial hostility was now explicit. I could have called the police right then, should have, probably, but something told me this was just the opening move in a much bigger game. So I documented everything, took photos, got everything on video, and sent Cameron home with a warning. Because sometimes the best weapon isn't the one you fire immediately. It's the one you keep in reserve until exactly the right moment. By now, Victoria realized I wasn't going to roll over and play dead like her previous victims. Time for the nuclear option. A full-scale social pressure campaign designed to turn the entire neighborhood against me. She started spreading whispers about the unstable black veteran with anger issues living next to the community pond. The rumor mill worked overtime. Suddenly I was supposedly suffering from PTSD, prone to violent outbursts, a danger to children and property values. Victoria discouraged neighbors from associating with me, citing safety concerns for their families. But the racial coding was becoming more explicit. She'd corner people at the mailboxes, voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm just worried about everyone's well-being, you understand. We've worked so hard to maintain our neighborhood's character. We can't let the wrong element take over." The smell of fresh mulch from the community landscaping crew mixed with the sound of hedge trimmers as I watched Victoria work her magic at the monthly HOA meeting. She'd scheduled an emergency vote on enhanced vehicle restrictions that would effectively ban motorcycles from the neighborhood. Claimed multiple residents had complained about noise pollution from my bike, despite the fact that I rarely started it before 10 a.m. and never after 8 p.m. Her theatrical performance was Oscar-worthy. Manicured nails tapping against the podium for emphasis. Designer outfit chosen specifically for maximum camera appeal because, yes, she was recording these meetings now for transparency. Every gesture calculated to portray her as the reasonable community leader, protecting families from the dangerous outsider. But the most insidious part was how she weaponized neighborhood fears. References to declining property values when certain types move in. Suggestions that military veterans might be unstable and pose risks to community safety. Dog whistles so loud they might as well have been air horns. The community split down predictable lines. Sophia stood by me along with Dot Walsh and 4 other neighbors who'd grown tired of HOA overreach, but plenty of residents were scared, terrified of becoming Victoria's next targets if they sided with the wrong person. I watched them during meetings, sitting in careful neutral zones, eyes down, desperate to avoid attention. The racial dynamics were impossible to ignore. The 3 other minority families in the neighborhood sat in complete silence, clearly understanding that any support for me would make them targets. The white families who opposed Victoria did so quietly, careful not to make their dissent too public. Meanwhile, I'd been doing my homework on HOA law and civil rights statutes. 22 years of reading technical manuals taught me that every system has rules, and every rule can be used as a weapon if you understand it properly. Spent my evenings studying our neighborhood's governing documents, cross-referencing them with state homeowner association statutes and federal fair housing law. What I found was beautiful in its simplicity. Victoria had been violating her own bylaws for years, but more importantly, she'd been violating federal discrimination laws. The governing documents prohibited discrimination based on race, religion, or military status, but she'd been systematically targeting exactly those protected classes. From my deployment experience with rules of engagement, I knew that procedural violations could invalidate entire operations. The same principle applied here. If Victoria couldn't follow her own association's bylaws or federal law, her decisions carried no legal weight, but I kept this knowledge to myself, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy it. That moment almost came during Cameron's most brazen act yet. I'd driven to visit my elderly aunt in the next county, planning a quiet weekend away from the HOA drama. What I didn't expect was for Cameron to treat my absence as an invitation to break into my garage with 3 of his friends. The kids had apparently learned lockpicking from YouTube, God bless the internet age, and planned to borrow my Harley for a weekend joyride. The cold metal picks felt foreign in Cameron's nervous, sweating hands as he worked on my garage door lock, probably imagining himself as some kind of teenage rebel. But my new security system had other plans. Silent alarm triggered the moment they started tampering with the lock, sending notifications to Sophia and automatically contacting local police. Response time was 8 minutes flat, not bad for a suburban department on a Saturday night. They caught Cameron and his crew red-handed, surrounded by lockpick tools and security footage that would make prosecutors weep with joy. The kids' hands were literally shaking as officers cuffed them, while borrowed lockpicks scattered across my garage floor like evidence of premeditation. Victoria arrived at the scene in her Mercedes within minutes, probably monitoring police scanners at this point. She tried every trick in the book, claiming it was a misunderstanding, suggesting Cameron was checking on the property for security purposes, even hinting that maybe I'd left the garage unlocked and Cameron was just investigating suspicious activity. But here's where her desperation revealed her true colors. When the police refused to buy her excuses, Victoria's mask slipped completely. "This is what happens when we let their kind into good neighborhoods," she said, not realizing the police body cameras were still recording. "We've had nothing but problems since he moved here. These people don't respect property or community standards." The police radio chatter mixed with Victoria's increasingly frantic and racist explanations created this surreal soundtrack to her empire crumbling in real time. But here's the thing about small-town cops. They might not be Harvard graduates, but they recognize overt racism when they see it. When I returned Sunday evening, the police briefed me on everything. Crystal clear security footage showed Cameron's premeditated break-in attempt, complete with YouTube lockpicking tutorials queued up on his phone, but more importantly, they had Victoria's racist rant recorded on multiple body cameras. I could have pressed felony charges right there: breaking and entering, attempted theft of a motor vehicle, possession of burglary tools, and now federal hate crime enhancements. Instead, I made the strategic choice to wait. This incident was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and rushing to press charges might tip off Victoria to the scope of evidence I was gathering. Sometimes patience is the deadliest weapon in your arsenal. 4 days after Cameron's arrest, Walsh knocked on my door with a manila folder, thick enough to choke a horse, and a look in her eyes that meant business. 25 years as a civil rights paralegal had taught her how to dig through public records like an archaeologist hunting for buried treasure. "Wash, you need to see this," she said, spreading documents across my kitchen table. "It's worse than we thought." What she'd uncovered made my blood run cold. Using her contacts at the county clerk's office and federal housing authorities, had cross-referenced property deeds, HOA financial records, business license filings, and demographic data. The pattern that emerged was a masterclass in systematic racial discrimination disguised as community management. Here's how Victoria's scam worked. Target minority homeowners with excessive violations and fines. When those fines went unpaid, and who has an extra few thousand lying around for bogus grass height violations, they automatically became liens against the property. Here's the part that made me want to punch a wall. Victoria's shell company, Meadowfield Asset Recovery LLC, had been purchasing those liens from the HOA at 60 cents on the dollar. Think about that for a second. She created the violations, imposed the fines, then bought the resulting debt at a discount. It's like a loan shark lending you money, then buying your IOU from himself at half price and calling it a business transaction. Once she owned the liens, Victoria could force foreclosure proceedings just like unpaid property taxes. Desperate homeowners facing legal costs they couldn't afford would sell quickly at below-market prices to avoid foreclosure. Guess whose real estate agency handled those distressed sales? And guess who often ended up buying the properties through various LLCs, then flipping them to white families for 30 to 40% profit? 7 properties in 3 years, Dot explained, her finger tracing the paper trail. All minority families, all following identical patterns, all generating massive commissions through her agency. The financial scope was staggering, $2.8 million in artificially generated real estate transactions with a clear racial motive. Victoria had turned our neighborhood HOA into her personal money printing machine with a systematic ethnic cleansing component, and most residents never realized they were funding their own community's demographic manipulation. But here's what made this discovery absolutely perfect. Remember my consultation work with the state attorney's office on municipal vehicle contracts? Well, their civil rights unit had been investigating similar discrimination patterns across 4 counties. I was literally working as a consultant on corruption cases while living next door to one of the most systematic housing discrimination schemes they'd ever see. The timing couldn't have been better. My evidence was already being compiled for prosecutors who specialized in exactly this type of civil rights violation. And, thanks to federal mail fraud laws, those certified violation notices Victoria loved so much, this wasn't just local corruption, this was a federal civil rights case waiting to happen. Dot's research revealed the victim profile: elderly minority residents on fixed incomes, single black mothers, veterans of color, Hispanic families, basically anyone less likely to hire attorneys and fight back while being in protected classes. Classic predatory targeting with clear discriminatory intent. The psychological manipulation was almost as disgusting as the financial theft. She's currently working on 3 more targets, Dot said, sliding another set of documents across the table, including you, obviously, but also the Martinez family, and that young black couple who just had twins. The scope of Victoria's operation explained everything: the selective enforcement, the weaponized code violations, the racial coding in her communications, even Cameron's obsession with my motorcycle. This wasn't personal vendetta, this was business, racist business designed to maintain neighborhood character while generating profits. But Victoria had made one critical mistake. She'd targeted someone who spent his days consulting with prosecutors about corruption patterns, someone who understood that documentation and patience could bring down entire criminal enterprises, and someone who knew federal civil rights law. The hunter had just become the hunted, and she had no idea what was coming. The next morning I called an emergency meeting in my garage. Sophia brought coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Dot arrived with 4 legal pads and enough pens to stock an office supply store. And I'd already contacted Maya Chen about expanding our legal strategy to include federal civil rights violations. The smell of motor oil and fresh coffee created the perfect atmosphere for plotting the downfall of a neighborhood tyrant. We're not just fighting an HOA president anymore, I told the group, spreading Dot's evidence across my workbench. We're taking down a criminal enterprise built on racial discrimination. Maya Chen joined us via speakerphone from her downtown office, her voice crackling through my garage's Bluetooth speaker. Based on the documentation you've provided, we're looking at potential civil rights violations, housing discrimination, mail fraud, wire fraud, and Fair Housing Act violations. This is federal prosecutor territory with serious criminal and civil penalties. The plan we developed was surgical in its precision: multiple pressure points, coordinated timing, maximum legal impact. Sophia would handle community organizing, quietly reaching out to Victoria's other victims, building a coalition of affected homeowners. Dot would continue her paper trail archaeology, documenting every transaction and timeline. Maya would prepare comprehensive civil rights and housing discrimination lawsuits, while I coordinated with both the state attorney's office and federal authorities. But we needed one more player, media coverage. Dot's neighbor works at KWTV, and she recommended Marcus Johnson, an investigative reporter who'd been tracking housing discrimination stories across the state. Marcus specialized in exposing corrupt officials who preyed on vulnerable minority homeowners. Exactly our situation. During our first phone conversation, Marcus's enthusiasm was infectious. "I've been waiting for a case like this," he said. "Clear paper trail, systematic discrimination, sympathetic victims. This could be the story that changes HOA law nationwide." While building our team, I learned something that changed my whole perspective on public records requests. Back in Afghanistan, we'd use intelligence gathering to identify supply chain corruption, following the money trail to find who was skimming diesel fuel or medical supplies. The same principles applied here, but with the added component of tracking discriminatory patterns. I started filing Freedom of Information Act requests with the city, county, state, and federal housing authorities. HOA board meeting minutes, code enforcement complaint records, sorted by applicant demographics, property transfer documents, even Dale Morrison's employment records, and any complaints filed against him. The beauty of FOIA requests is that corrupt officials can't hide behind privacy laws. Government business is public business, and they hate being reminded of that fact. Plus, the demographic sorting revealed patterns that were impossible to ignore. My army buddy, Rico Santos, drove down from Dallas with surveillance equipment that would make the NSA jealous. "Heard you were having neighborhood problems," he said, unloading cases of cameras and audio gear from his pickup truck. Rico runs a private security firm now, specializing in corporate fraud investigations and civil rights documentation. We spent the weekend installing long-range audio equipment, strategically positioned near Victoria's favorite restaurant, Chez Laurent, where she held her weekly business lunches with Dale Morrison and City Council member Patricia Wells. All surveillance conducted from public property using commercially available technology, completely legal under federal wiretapping laws. The technical education I got from Rico was invaluable. Modern surveillance equipment doesn't require breaking into buildings or planting bugs. Digital zoom cameras with telephoto lenses can capture license plates from half a mile away. Parabolic microphones can pick up conversations through restaurant windows from across the street. Everything we needed was available on Amazon with overnight shipping. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Cameron's girlfriend, Jessica Park. Turns out this kid had been bragging to her about his mother's business genius, explaining the entire property acquisition scheme like he was proud of it. But he'd also been sharing his mother's racist views, apparently thinking Jessica would be impressed. Sophia arranged the meeting through her twins, who knew Jessica from school. The girl showed up at my garage looking terrified but determined, clutching her phone like it contained nuclear launch codes, which, in a sense, it did. "Cameron told me everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How his mum targets black families specifically, forces them out, then sells their houses to white families at higher prices. He thinks it's cool, like she's cleaning up the neighborhood." The recordings were devastating. Cameron's voice clear as day, explaining how his mother identified problem minorities, manufactured violations targeting them specifically, and coordinated with code enforcement to pressure them into selling. He even bragged about the break-in attempt, calling it reconnaissance for future harassment campaigns against troublemakers who don't know their place. But the most damning recording was Cameron repeating his mother's words verbatim: "We can't let them take over our neighborhood. Property values depend on keeping the right kind of people here." Maya Chen's voice over the phone was practically purring when I played the recordings. "This is conspiracy to commit housing discrimination with clear intent to maintain racial segregation through fraudulent means. Federal prosecutors love cases with this level of documented criminal intent and clear discriminatory motive." Everything was falling into place: community support, legal strategy, media coverage, surveillance evidence, civil rights documentation, and now direct admissions of discriminatory intent from the conspirators themselves. All we needed was the perfect moment to spring our trap. Victoria had no idea that her reign of terror was about to become a case study in how to destroy racist, corrupt officials using their own weapons against them. By this point, Victoria must have sensed something was wrong. I'd stopped paying her bogus fines, stopped responding to her violation notices, And worst of all, I kept showing up to HOA meetings with a notebook and that confident smile that says, "I know something you don't. Desperate people do desperate things." And Victoria Blackwood was about to prove that rule in spectacular fashion. The sabotage attempt happened on a Tuesday night. I was in the house watching the evening news when Rico's surveillance system started pinging alerts on my phone. Motion detected in the garage, infrared signatures moving around my motorcycle. I pulled up the live camera feed and watched Cameron Blackwood crouched next to my Harley with a wrench set, systematically loosening the brake cable connections. Not just loosening, carefully adjusting them to fail gradually. The kid had actually researched this, probably on the same YouTube channels that taught him lockpicking. He wasn't trying to kill me, just cause a minor accident that would teach me a lesson about knowing my place in the community. The metallic scraping of the cable housing against the frame made my skin crawl as I watched him work. But this time, Cameron wasn't alone. His phone was propped up against my toolbox, and I could hear Victoria's voice giving him instructions through a video call. "Make sure it looks like normal wear." Her voice carried clearly through my surveillance system. "We need him gone, but it has to look accidental. Can't have that type ruining our neighborhood's reputation." I let him finish. "Sometimes the best evidence comes from letting criminals complete their crimes on camera while recording their racist motivations." By the time Cameron slipped out of my garage, I had 52 minutes of high-definition footage showing premeditated sabotage of a motor vehicle with clear discriminatory intent, a federal hate crime enhancement in addition to the underlying felony. The next morning, during my routine maintenance check, I discovered the tampering immediately. 22 years of working on military vehicles teaches you to spot mechanical sabotage from a mile away. I photographed everything before making repairs, then called Detective Williams at the Sheriff's Department. The fingerprint recovery team found Cameron's clear impressions all over the brake assembly. This wasn't teenage mischief anymore. Combined with the break-in attempt and the recorded racist motivations, we were looking at escalating hate crimes that could have resulted in serious injury or death. More importantly, it established a clear pattern of conspiracy between Victoria and her son to commit felony crimes against a targeted minority neighbor. Victoria's reaction to the police investigation was pure panic, wrapped in righteous indignation, mixed with barely concealed racism. She marched over to Sophia's house that same afternoon, all fake smiles and thinly veiled threats. Sophia recorded the entire conversation on her phone, capturing Victoria's suggestion that certain types of people needed to learn their place in good neighborhoods, and that single mothers who associate with troublemakers might find themselves facing the same harassment. The witness intimidation charge practically wrote itself, but with federal hate crime enhancements. Sophia's hands were shaking when she played me the recording later that evening, but her voice was steady. "I've dealt with bullies before in the hospital. They always overplay their hand when they're scared, but this felt different. The racism was so open." Meanwhile, Victoria was manipulating the HOA board to threaten special assessments against uncooperative residents, essentially trying to tax us into submission. She'd discovered that HOA boards can impose emergency assessments for almost any reason, and she planned to hit Sophia, Dot, and me with $2,000 community improvement fees that just happened to target her biggest critics and the only people supporting the black veteran. But here's where her desperation led to a critical mistake. Victoria contacted Robert Martinez, the editor of our local newspaper, and her longtime poker buddy, requesting negative coverage of the unstable black veteran disrupting neighborhood harmony. She wanted a front-page story about PTSD dangers, property value impacts, and how certain demographics threatened community safety. What she didn't know was that Robert's nephew served in the same army unit as me 2 deployments later. Small world. Instead of printing Victoria's racist propaganda, Robert called me directly to verify the story. That conversation led to him investigating Victoria's operation independently, turning her media manipulation attempt into another avenue of evidence gathering. The bribery attempt came the following Friday. Victoria showed up at my door with a bottle of expensive wine and her most sincere smile, suggesting we work out our differences like civilized neighbors. She offered to drop all HOA fines and restrictions in exchange for my cooperation and understanding. The sweetener was beautiful in its corruption and racism. She suggested I could receive contractor preference for all HOA maintenance work, potentially thousands in monthly income, if I just stopped causing problems. But the racial coding was explicit. "We need to maintain neighborhood standards. I'm sure you understand the importance of property values and community character." Classic quid pro quo bribery, with a side of racial manipulation. And she laid it out like she was doing me a favor by letting me know my place. My palms were sweating as I gripped the hidden recording device in my pocket, but I kept my voice steady and interested. That sounds reasonable, Victoria. Tell me more about how this contractor arrangement would work. 41 minutes of her explaining the mechanics of corruption, all captured in crystal clear audio. She detailed how the system worked: target minority families, create violations, force sales, maintain neighborhood demographics, and reward compliant minorities who knew their place with small benefits. The final piece of evidence came from Cameron himself, facing felony charges with hate crime enhancements and serious juvenile consequences. His attorney suggested cooperation in exchange for reduced sentencing. The kid cracked like an egg, revealing not just his own crimes, but his mother's detailed instructions for the entire harassment campaign. Turns out Victoria had a literal playbook, a written document outlining her property acquisition strategy with explicit racial targeting, complete with timelines, demographic profiles, and coordination protocols with Dale Morrison. Cameron had been recording some of these planning sessions for reference, creating an evidence goldmine that civil rights prosecutors dream about. The trap was set. All the pieces were in position. Now we just needed the perfect moment to spring it. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Victoria Blackwood was about to prove that principle in the most spectacular way possible. She launched her nuclear option, a full-scale character assassination campaign designed to destroy my reputation before I could destroy hers. The false allegations started subtly: whispered conversations at the mailboxes about my erratic behavior and concerning late-night activities, then escalated to direct claims that I'd threatened her and Cameron. But the racial component became explicit. Victoria painted herself as a terrified white single mother, protecting her son and neighborhood from a dangerous black veteran who couldn't handle civilian life and posed a threat to community safety and property values. The racist dog whistles became air horns, references to how these people bring violence and chaos to good neighborhoods, suggestions that military veterans like him might be unstable and pose risks to white families, fear-mongering about property values declining when certain types move into quality communities. The coup de grace was her media manipulation attempt. Victoria contacted Lisa Chen at the Tribune Herald, a sympathetic columnist who specialized in human interest stories about community safety. She fed her a carefully crafted narrative about minority veterans and neighborhood danger, complete with fabricated quotes about my threatening behavior toward white children. What she didn't count on was Lisa doing actual journalism. She called the sheriff's department to verify Victoria's claims, contacted Sophia and Dot for corroborating statements, and even reached out to my former Army unit commander. When the facts didn't match Victoria's story, Lisa smelled a bigger scandal and started investigating her instead. Victoria's trembling hands were visible during the next HOA meeting, as she realized her media strategy had backfired. The woman who'd controlled every narrative for 5 years was losing her grip on the story, and everyone could see it. Her final legal gambit was a restraining order, claiming I'd stalked and threatened her. The sworn affidavit was a masterpiece of creative fiction with racist undertones, alleged incidents of me following her car, making threatening gestures while she walked her dog, and verbally intimidating her during chance encounters at the grocery store. Each incident described in terms that emphasized racial fear and white victimhood. One tiny problem: Rico's surveillance system had been tracking my movements for weeks as part of our evidence gathering. Every single incident Victoria described had me documented elsewhere: working in my garage, meeting with Maya Chen at her office, or visiting my aunt in the next county. Her sworn statements weren't just lies. They were provable perjury with racist motivations caught on camera. The restraining order hearing was a thing of beauty. Maya Chen walked into that courtroom with a tablet full of time-stamped video evidence and GPS records, showing I was literally hundreds of miles away during Victoria's alleged stalking incidents. The judge's expression shifted from skeptical to outright hostile as the evidence mounted. "Mrs. Blackwood," Judge Henderson said, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years on the bench, "perjury in a sworn affidavit is a felony. I'm dismissing this restraining order and referring your statements to the district attorney for investigation." But the real breakthrough came from Rico's parabolic surveillance of Victoria's weekly lunch meetings. We finally captured the smoking gun, clear audio of her planning my harassment with City Council member Patricia Wells and Dale Morrison. The Washington problem needs to be resolved before he causes real damage. Victoria's voice carried clearly through the restaurant window. Dale, can you find building code violations? Patricia, what about zoning issues? We need him gone before he figures out the full scope of our operation. Can't let his kind think they belong here. Wells's response was equally damning. Property acquisition is legitimate business, but we can't let one troublemaker expose the system. Maybe it's time for more serious pressure. These people need to learn their place. The federal implications were immediate. Civil rights cases require proof of ongoing discriminatory conspiracy, and we just captured explicit planning of that conspiracy with clear racial motivations on audio recording. When I played the clip for my state attorney contact, his response was immediate. We need to move on this now. This is exactly what the Civil Rights Division has been looking for. Meanwhile, Marcus Johnson's investigation was reaching its climax. His undercover camera work had captured Victoria, attempting to bribe Dale Morrison with Cowboys playoff tickets in exchange for accelerating code enforcement against me and Sophia, specifically targeting the Black and Hispanic families. The footage was damning enough to make civil rights prosecutors weep with joy. The community pressure was building too. 31 homeowners signed a petition supporting me and detailing their own harassment experiences. 4 minority families came forward with documentation showing they'd lost their homes through Victoria's identical harassment patterns. The neighborhood was finally waking up to what had been happening in their midst, but the most powerful testimony came from the Martinez family, who'd been quietly documenting their own harassment for 2 years. They had recordings of Victoria explicitly telling them that Mexican families didn't belong in quality neighborhoods and needed to find somewhere more suitable. Cameron's complete cooperation provided the final evidence we needed. His juvenile plea agreement required full disclosure of his mother's instructions, and the kid provided everything: recorded phone conversations, text message threads, even handwritten notes detailing surveillance assignments Victoria had given him, all with explicit racial targeting. The mother-son betrayal was devastating to watch. Cameron's attorney had explained that cooperation was his only chance to avoid adult felony charges with hate crime enhancements, and the kid chose self-preservation over family loyalty. Can't say I blamed him. Victoria had turned her own son into a hate crime accomplice. Everything was converging toward a single moment. Maya Chen had filed comprehensive civil rights and housing discrimination lawsuits. Federal prosecutors were preparing hate crime and civil rights violation charges. Marcus Johnson's exposé was scheduled to air during the evening news cycle, and the HOA had called an emergency meeting to address the community crisis. The stage was set for Victoria's final performance, though she had no idea she'd be playing to a very different audience than expected. The Meadowfield Community Center had never seen anything like it. What started as a routine emergency HOA meeting turned into the neighborhood equivalent of the Super Bowl, complete with standing room only and people live streaming on their phones. All 180 seats were filled with another 70 residents standing along the walls. The energy in the room was electric. Half the crowd came to support Victoria. Half came to watch her burn. The racial divide was impossible to ignore. Most of Victoria's supporters were white, while most of the opposition included the neighborhood's minority families and their white allies. Marcus Johnson's KWTV news crew positioned themselves strategically near the back, cameras rolling for what promised to be either a boring community meeting or the civil rights story of the decade. Detective Williams and 2 federal agents sat quietly in folding chairs by the exit, looking like they were attending their nephew's graduation, instead of planning multiple felony arrests with federal hate crime enhancements. Victoria took the podium at exactly 7 p.m., wearing her most expensive designer outfit, a navy blue blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly HOA dues. She'd clearly spent hours preparing for this performance, and her opening gambit was Oscar-worthy victimhood with racist undertones. "Friends and neighbors," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, "I stand before you tonight as a single mother who's been terrorized by a dangerous individual living in our community." Her manicured hands gestured dramatically toward where I sat in the 3rd row, surrounded by Sophia, Dot, and a dozen supporters, notably the most diverse group in the room. She painted herself as the innocent community leader trying to protect family values and property values from the unstable outsider who'd brought violence and chaos to their peaceful, well-established neighborhood, described alleged threats that never happened, harassment that existed only in her imagination, and dangerous behavior that consisted mainly of me maintaining my motorcycle in my own garage. But the racial coding was explicit now. References to maintaining neighborhood character and community standards. Suggestions that certain types of people didn't understand how to live in quality communities. Dog whistles about property values and safety that everyone understood. Her supporters applauded on cue, creating this theatrical atmosphere that would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetically racist. Victoria had choreographed this entire performance, from the seating arrangements to the dramatic pauses designed for maximum camera impact. When she finished her opening statement, I approached the podium carrying a simple manila folder. No dramatic gestures, no raised voice, just calm, methodical presentation of facts. The room fell silent as I connected my laptop to the community center's projection system. "Mrs. Blackwood has told you an interesting story," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. "Now let me show you the truth." The first slide displayed a timeline of harassment, every violation notice, every fine, every documented incident of selective enforcement. But this timeline included demographic data, showing clearly that every targeted family was minority, while white families with identical violations faced no consequences. The crowd murmured as they saw the systematic racial pattern laid out in black and white. Then came the financial records showing Victoria's property acquisition scheme with demographic breakdowns. 7 minority families had lost their homes through this fraudulent system, while 0 white families had been targeted, despite identical or worse violations. 7 families have lost their homes through this racially discriminatory system, I continued, advancing to photographs of the displaced families, all black and Hispanic faces. Mrs. Blackwood created violations targeting minorities specifically, imposed fines, purchased the resulting liens at discount, then profited from forced foreclosures that maintained neighborhood demographics. The room erupted in angry conversations as neighbors realized what had been happening under their noses. But the real bombshell came next: audio recordings of Victoria's coordination meetings with Dale Morrison and City Council member Patricia Wells. Victoria's own voice filled the room through the sound system. "We can't let them take over our neighborhood. Property values depend on keeping the right kind of people here." Her face went white as her own words condemned her. She tried to interrupt, claiming the recordings were fabricated, but I kept advancing slides, video footage of Cameron's break-in attempts with audio of Victoria instructing him in harassment tactics, specifically targeting troublemakers who don't know their place, bank records showing money flowing between her various shell companies, and the HOA, demographic analysis proving systematic racial targeting. Then came the smoking gun, Victoria's recorded conversation detailing her business model of targeting minority families to maintain neighborhood character while generating real estate profits. "We need him gone before he figures out the full scope of our operation. Can't let his kind think they belong here." Her voice echoed through the packed community center. That's when Detective Williams approached the podium, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent room. "Mrs. Blackwood, you're under arrest for civil rights violations, housing discrimination, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit hate crimes, and perjury." The metallic click of handcuffs seemed unnaturally loud in the packed community center. Flash photography from phones captured every moment as Victoria's empire crumbled in real time. Federal agents simultaneously arrested Dale Morrison and Patricia Wells, who'd been foolish enough to attend the meeting, thinking they were still in control. "This is a mistake," Victoria shouted as the handcuffs secured her wrists. "I'm the victim here. He's the criminal. This neighborhood needs protection from people like him." But her protests fell on deaf ears. The evidence was overwhelming, the documentation undeniable, and her own recorded voice had provided the final proof of criminal conspiracy with clear discriminatory intent. The crowd's reaction was explosive. Victims of her harassment stood and applauded, while her former supporters sat in stunned silence. Several people were crying, families who'd lost their homes, finally seeing justice served. Cameron appeared in the back of the room with his juvenile attorney, looking smaller than his 17 years. He approached the microphone with shaking hands and read a prepared statement apologizing for his crimes and acknowledging that his mother had manipulated him into becoming her accomplice in hate crimes. Marcus Johnson's cameras captured everything: the arrests, the community reaction, the evidence presentation, and most importantly, the moment when a racist system finally faced consequences. Within hours, the footage would go viral across social media, turning our neighborhood drama into a national symbol of grassroots resistance to housing discrimination. As they led Victoria away in handcuffs, she made one final desperate attempt to control the narrative. This isn't over. I'll fight these charges. This community needs proper leadership to maintain standards. But it was over. 5 years of racist tyranny ended with the click of handcuffs and the cheers of liberated neighbors. The transformation of Meadowfield Estates happened faster than anyone expected. Within a week of Victoria's arrest, the entire HOA board resigned in shame, triggering emergency elections that brought Sophia Rodriguez into the president's chair and Dot Walsh as treasurer. Their first official act was refunding $247,000 in illegitimate fines to affected homeowners, money that represented years of racially motivated harassment finally returned to its rightful owners. The new board rewrote our community bylaws from scratch, emphasizing transparency, homeowner rights, and explicit anti-discrimination protections. Property values increased 12% within 6 months, as word spread about our neighborhood's transformation from racist HOA nightmare to model inclusive community. For me personally, the victory meant more than just legal vindication. Rebuilding that Harley with Cameron as part of his juvenile community service became an unexpected healing journey for both of us. The sweet smell of penetrating oil and the satisfying click of properly torqued bolts filled my garage as we worked together. The kids' genuine mechanical aptitude emerging from beneath years of racist indoctrination. The sound of my heritage softail purring in the driveway no longer carried stress and conflict. It represented freedom restored and community bonds forged through shared struggle against injustice. My elderly aunt moved to the neighborhood 8 months later, drawn by the genuine diversity and warmth that emerged from our victory over racism and corruption. The legal aftermath was swift and decisive. Victoria received 6 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to civil rights violations, housing discrimination, mail fraud, and conspiracy charges. Dale Morrison got 3 years, while City Council member Patricia Wells faced separate federal trials. The civil rights lawsuit resulted in a $4.2 million judgment, providing full restitution for victims and funding for community improvements. Cameron's redemption became one of our most satisfying outcomes. His 300 hours of community service were completed working alongside me on neighborhood motorcycle maintenance and diversity education programs. The kid who'd once tried to steal my bike while spouting racist rhetoric became my informal apprentice, learning valuable life skills while making genuine amends for his hate crimes. Our legal victory became a nationwide model for fighting housing discrimination. The case inspired federal legislation requiring demographic transparency from homeowner associations, and 18 other communities contacted me for advice on organizing resistance to racist HOA boards. What started as defending one motorcycle became a movement for housing justice and racial equality. The community healing project we created from the lawsuit settlement became our lasting legacy, the Meadowfield Veterans and Civil Rights Memorial Garden. I led the design and construction, transforming what had been a symbol of division into a place of unity and remembrance. Cameron coordinated teen volunteers, working alongside neighbors who'd transformed from strangers into family through shared adversity against racism. Sophia and I discovered that fighting discrimination together had created something deeper than friendship. Our relationship grew naturally from mutual respect into genuine love, both of us finding healing through community service and social justice work. We're planning a spring wedding in the Memorial Garden, surrounded by the neighbors who became our chosen family through the fight for equality. The memorial includes dedicated motorcycle parking for veteran riders of all backgrounds, turning my Harley from a neighborhood controversy into a symbol of community pride and inclusive values. The opening ceremony drew over 400 attendees, including families who'd lost their homes to Victoria's racist scheme and had since returned to a transformed, welcoming neighborhood. But here's the most important lesson we learned. Documentation, community organizing, and basic knowledge of civil rights law can defeat any discriminatory system. Racist HOA tyrants thrive on isolation and ignorance. They crumble when neighbors unite across racial lines with evidence and determination. Remember these 3 key strategies. First, document everything with photos, recordings, and written records, especially noting any racial patterns. Second, Never fight discrimination alone. Build diverse coalitions with affected neighbors and allies. Third, learn your rights under civil rights law, fair housing regulations, and HOA statutes. Knowledge is your most powerful weapon against racist bureaucratic bullies. Cameron, now 18 and genuinely reformed, captured it perfectly during his high school graduation speech. My mum taught me that power means controlling other people and keeping them in their place. D-Wash taught me that real power means serving your community and fighting for everyone's rights. The ripple effects continue spreading. Our case became a law school teaching example and a federal training case for civil rights prosecutors. Marcus Johnson's investigation won National Journalism Awards, and Maya Chen now specializes in housing discrimination cases full-time. Using our victory as a template, we proved that ordinary citizens can take down racist, corrupt officials who think they're untouchable. We demonstrated that housing discrimination can be defeated through community organizing and legal action. But our work isn't finished. Last week, I received a call from Miguel Santos in the next county over. He's dealing with eerily similar harassment involving solar panel permits and building code manipulation, with clear targeting of Latino families. Same racist playbook, different neighborhood. Looks like our Justice League has another mission ahead. That story of taking down a solar panel permit scam with clear discriminatory intent, well, that's a tale for another day. And trust me, it involves even more shocking racism and corruption than you just witnessed. Drop a comment with your worst HOA nightmare. Share your experiences with housing discrimination. You're not alone in this fight, and together we can defeat any racist system. Hit that subscribe button and join the HOA Stories family if you want to see more ordinary people taking down corrupt officials who forgot they work for us, not the other way around. And remember, civil rights are worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the opposition seems. That's all for today's HOA Madness. If watching justice serve itself made your day, smash that like button, share your thoughts down below, and make sure you're subscribed. More outrageous neighborhood showdowns and civil rights victories are just around the corner.